Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to UCL and welcome to the UCL Medical Sciences Lecture Series. I'm your host, Dr. Neftali Marina Gonzalez. I'm a professor, I'm an associate professor here in the faculty. And I'm the organizer of this series as well, and it's my great privilege to present today's speaker. She's my colleague. She's been a colleague of mine for a number of years, and we've been working together in the Applied Medical Sciences course. And she's gonna talk to us about the long winter, what's in store for us in the next phase of COVID-19. So please write your questions in the chat. I will read the questions at the end of the session. We're going to have a questions and answer mini session. But in the meantime, please help me welcome Dr. Jennifer Rohn. Jenny, thank you very much for helping us with the lecture series. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Marina. And welcome, everybody, and thanks for coming to my talk on this rainy evening. So I'm here to tell you about COVID-19, what's in store for us in the wintertime and going forward. So before we talk about the science, just want to maybe let you know who I am, so you know who you're listening to today. So I'm a principal research fellow in the Division of Medicine here at UCL, and I've been at UCL since 2007. Now, as Dr. Marina mentioned, I'm part of the Applied Medical Sciences BSc. I'm a deputy course director, and in this course we fuse science and medicine together to create graduates that are fluent in both, and it's a really excellent course. I have a PhD in virology from the University of Washington in Seattle, and for the past 20, 30 years, I've been running a research team studying the interactions of pathogens with our hosts. I have a special interest in how pathogens, how the bad bugs can exploit our weaknesses. It's really fascinating. Early on in the pandemic, I was co-opted by UCL Media to serve as an expert commentator, and to date I've given hundreds of interviews both nationally and internationally, and really I didn't think the news story was going to run that long, but it's been running and running, and there's no signs of it slowing down. So first, before we talk about COVID, let's talk about viruses. I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Viruses are really simple creatures. In their essence, they're just two components, two parts. The first is that they have a very small genetic blueprint. This is called a genome, and this is made out of DNA or RNA, and you can see on my screen here the squiggly thing is the blueprint. And the second ingredient is that they have a coat or a capsid made out of protein that's shown in green here, and this protects the genome from destruction. Now that's all you need to be a virus. Some viruses have extra accessories. For example, they have enzymes they carry around with them to help them grow, and also they optionally have a fatty membrane on the outside that they've actually stolen from the host. I'll tell you more about that in a bit. So that's a virus, very simple thing. You can see here they come in different shapes. But the thing to keep in mind is that technically viruses are not alive. They're tiny, inanimate, organic machines. They're like little death robots. And they are 100% dependent on us to survive, on a host. So if the virus cannot escape from the sick person, they're dead in the water, they're dead forever. So the virus must have a host who's alive before they escape to the next host. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So how do they replicate? So let's talk about the cycle. First, I need to get into our body. And actually, this is a lot harder than it sounds. The environment is very harsh. You know, the air is dry. Viruses like to be in a moist, warm environment. So they have to escape from the air and get into our bodies. And then they have to attach to our cells. So they use a lock and key mechanism. In the case of Sars Co2, the COVID virus, you can see here the keys are these little yellow spikes that are produced on the outside of the virus. And they want to, these keys want to find the ACE2 lock. ACE2 is just one of our proteins. It's a random protein. It's not a virus protein. It's just one of our proteins. And Sars Co2 has learned how to latch onto that. And in doing so, it can get inside our cells. And that is where the fun begins. Don't worry about this diagram, it's very complicated. This is just to show that the virus, the next step, it gets inside the cell and it sets up a cozy virus factory. And the whole point is that it wants to make millions and millions of copies of itself. So it goes inside, it makes more DNA or RNA, it makes more of the blueprint, it makes more copies of the protein so they can make that nice cozy coat. But it's important to stress that the virus is forcing our cells to do all the work for it. So it's almost enslaving our cells to become virus factories, which is pretty amazing. And then it has to escape, and it does that by assembling at the surface and budding outwards, shown here. That's a bit tricky as well, but the virus gets around that. And then it has to go to the next cell and set up a new virus factory. You need hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of virus factories to make enough proteins and particles to be successful as a virus. And then that's not enough either. You really have to get to the next victim. So you can be, replicate as much as you want inside one body, but if you can't make it to the next host, you're not a good virus. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So we don't take this lying down, of course. We have an immune system. How do we defend ourselves against viruses? Well, we have lots of different strategies. First of all, we have lots of barriers, passive barriers. For example, the skin is very tough. We've got stuff in our eyes, nose, and mouth that can destroy viruses. But if the virus gets past that, then we have an innate immune response. This is sort of an ancient system of defending ourselves. And if that doesn't work, then the antibodies come along. These are these little beautiful green and blue things in this picture. They're very tiny. They're much smaller than the virus that they are attacking. But they attack it, they do. They stick all over it and flag it up for destruction and recognition. And then they call them the bad boys, the T cells. These are the assassin cells that go around and try to destroy the virus factories. So these T cells can learn what is a normal host cell, like what's a normal uninfected cell, and what's a cell that has to go. And that's when it goes into high gear. And there's all sorts of other immunity that's way too complicated to talk about. But really, we're very well equipped. But the most important thing to stress, and if you take home anything from today, it's that immunity is often not enough. And usually, I would say it's not enough. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at all the terrible outbreaks of history shown in this infographic, where the bigger the circle, the more terrible the outbreak. And the big daddy of them all was smallpox, which has killed 300+ million people. So most people who got a smallpox infection had an immune system, a pretty decent one, but they still died. So that is the take home here. We have an immune system, but it's often overwhelmed by these very tiny invaders. So zoonoses are a particular danger. This is a fancy word for viruses or a bacteria that jump from an animal to a human. Whenever that happens, really bad things happen. So animal viruses that jump onto humans are especially dangerous. They're not adapted to us. They might be just too strong and they might overwhelm us and kill us before they can spread, which is not good if you're a virus. And they are not going to encounter any immunity because we've never seen it before. So zoonoses are really dangerous. Here's an example. Ebola occasionally spills over into humans from monkeys, and it causes a really devastating disease. It's actually not very productive because it kills everybody before it can spread. Some new zoonoses can eventually evolve and adapt to become sort of more accustomed to us. And this is what happened with HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. It evolved from a monkey virus in the last century, and it's now pretty much established as a real human virus. Other zoonoses involve viruses that thankfully are not very good at the job. So people are occasionally infected by things like bird flu. It causes a really nasty disease, but the bird flu is not very good at jumping from human to human. It hasn't solved that trick of getting from one infected host to the other. So fortunately, those are usually dead-end infections. But I must say that of all the really bad pandemic influenzas that have happened in recent years have been caused by the mixing and matching of animal influenza with human influenza. And so the take-home message here is that animals are really dangerous when it comes to virus and zoonotic infections. Okay, so having set the stage about the virology, let's talk about corona. Well, coronaviruses are animal and bird viruses. We've known about them for ages. They were discovered in the 1930s. They've got this outer envelope with these really prominent spikes. Various family members exist, and including ones that cause the common cold. So the common cold is caused by coronaviruses and other viruses. So we've known about these guys for ages. But this family of viruses does have more deadly members, especially when they become zoonotic. So first there was SARS Classic, there's MERS, and then now, of course, COVID-19. So SARS Classic, what do I mean by that? Well, that's the Sars Epidemic from 2003. You may or not have been alive for that, but it was a pretty bad outbreak, but it only lasted a year, and then we got it under control with public health measures. And it arose probably from a bat via some sort of animal intermediate, probably a civet, I'm not really sure, and that jumped onto humans and caused the problem. SARS was very deadly, much deadlier than COVID-19, but not as infectious. MERS, on the other hand, is still with us. This is another bat virus that jumped onto camels, and then from there to humans. It's still with us. And it's incredibly rare, and it's very, very deadly. Fortunately, it is very rare, but it's still out there. Okay, so those are the two known coronavirus baddies, and now we can add to it a third member, Sars Co2, which is another zoonosis, more than likely from a bat, probably. I mean, we never be completely sure, but that's what it looks like. It arose late December, probably in 2019 in China, where wild animals mingle with people. Whenever wild animals mingle with people, it's a recipe for disaster when it comes to viruses. Safe to say. The animal intermediate is still not clear. It probably didn't go from bat to human, but through some other weird and wacky animal at that market. In 9 to 10 months, it's infected 37 million people worldwide and killed more than 1 million. So this is an amazingly successful virus. And why is it so successful? It's less deadly than SARS Classic, but it's more infectious. And not only is it more infectious, but it's able to spread when we don't have symptoms. And that is exactly what you want to do if you're a virus. You want to get to your next house before you kill it. So this is why Sars Co2 is so successful. And I just want to point out this beautiful micrograph here. This shows this virus factory I was telling you about. This is a human cell, and these are Sars CoV-2 particles, viruses budding off, stealing that host membrane and going off to wreak havoc. That's a beautiful image there captured from Hong Kong. Okay, so in the last half of my talk, I'm just going to answer five questions about what I keep hearing. People keep asking me, and I think you'll all be interested in these answers, and hopefully it won't be too depressing because there isn't a lot of good news at the moment. First of all, can we find a cure? Well, this is a great question. Historically, unfortunately, antivirus drugs are very difficult to develop. We have a few. We've got one for AIDS, we've got one for cold sores and herpes, but really, and a few others, but really they're difficult to develop. And that is because the virus factory is made out of our cells. So when we attack it, we cause all sorts of other problems. So that's why it's difficult to develop an antivirus. But the two main strategies that people are using now to try to combat COVID-19 is first to shut down the virus, which, as I mentioned, is difficult, or to shut down the immune overreaction, which is what damages our body. So forget the virus, just try to suppress the immune damage. There are thousands, literally thousands of clinical trials ongoing right now of repurposed antivirals from the past that didn't work, other drugs that didn't work, drugs that worked for other things, and novel therapies that are specifically targeted for COVID-19. Everything but the kitchen sink is being thrown at this. And you'll have heard of a few of these. Remdesivir is a promising antiviral, was originally developed for Ebola virus, and now it looks like it can shorten recovery time of COVID patients by about 5 days. It's not a magic bullet, but it's helpful. Similarly, I'm sure you've all heard now of steroids. These are cheap and cheerful drugs that have been around forever that just happen to dampen the immune system well enough to save about 1/3 of those people who are on ventilators in hospital. So again, this is not a magic cure or bullet, but it is really super helpful. I guess all of you by now have also heard of Regeneron's antibody cocktail. This was recently made famous by President Trump, who said that this is the reason he was cured. I have to stress that there's no evidence that that was a cure. He was taking all sorts of things. There's no evidence yet that this works, but it's one of the ones that people are studying. So I expect a lot of activity in this space in the future, and you need to watch the news and see what's coming up next. It's really amazing activity. Okay, next question. What can survivors expect long term? Now, I find this a particularly interesting question because when you're looking at all these curves, how is it doing today? We're looking at live versus dead. This many people have died. But that statistic, that binary statistic, does not tell the whole story. There's a whole host of things that can go wrong even if you haven't been killed by COVID-19. So first of all, if you've had a really serious infection and you've been in hospital on a ventilator, post-discharge, you survived, but you may need rehabilitation and you may have some long-term disabilities. And we still don't know what those are because it's too soon. Secondly, there's something that's really, really mysterious, which people are calling long COVID. This is, as I said, it's very mysterious. It seems to be quite common and it happens in younger people. And it causes basically months and months of very strange symptoms, including a completely debilitating fatigue and all sorts of pains and aches and weirdnesses and fevers, and it goes on and on and on for months. We still don't know what causes this. We think it might be some sort of post-viral reaction. We don't know how many people have it because this is a statistic that is not officially recorded, but it's out there and we don't know how long these people are going to be suffering. Now, this is a little bit scary. Studies have shown that even if you have no symptoms and you're infected with COVID, you can have damage to some of your organs. People have seen problems in evidence from lungs, from heart, from nerves. So even if you have an asymptomatic or mild infection, we might be carrying around a burden of disability that we don't even know about. And we don't know if sometime in the future it's going to pop up. So this is something we really need to keep an eye on. So what's clear from this weird mix of symptoms is that the virus, either the virus itself or the inflammation that it causes, seems to act all over the body, far beyond just the lungs. And there's still so much we don't understand. We can't understand long-term effects until we've lived with the virus long-term, and we just haven't. Okay, this is a 10 million pound question. Will a vaccine work and give us herd immunity? Well, first, I just want to point out, it's not clear if you could ever get herd immunity without a vaccine. And some people think you can, but it's not really what we see in the real world. We all get colds every year, right? We get colds from coronavirus. We're exposed to it every year, and every year we get it. So herd immunity really requires the extra immune stimulation that a vaccine can bestow. However, there's no guarantee that any of the vaccines we're developing will work well enough to give us herd immunity. And also, it may not last very long. So it could be that we have to get a booster periodically, like the flu. Now, there's some interesting evidence for cross-reacting immunity. So say you've had the common cold coronavirus. Some people are showing that they've got immune signals that can cross-react with COVID-19. So maybe having been exposed to a cold might help us against coronaviruses, the Sars Co2 virus. Most experts think that that's probably happening, but it's not going to afford very much protection, and we really can't bank on that. So inevitably, we're going to need 50 to 60% of people to be vaccinated with a decent vaccine to get herd immunity, and we may have to chop this up every year. Now, the problem here is that imagine we get a vaccine. This relies on public trust in vaccines, and as you are probably all aware, public trust in vaccines has been waning in recent years. There's a strong anti-vax movement. So we really have to be able to persuade 60% of a community or a country to vaccinate for this to work, for all of our sakes. So this is something that we really need to lobby on, and people need to trust vaccines. But on a positive note, there are a whopping 170 or more vaccine candidates in the pipeline right now, diverse types, old school methods, like cutting edge technology and everything in between. 170 vaccine candidates. And there's 11 in phase 3 clinical trials right now. That's the last clinical trial you have to go through. And just to put this into context, it normally takes 10 years to make a vaccine, and we've got 170 in 10 months. So for me personally, this has been the most amazing mobilization of global science that I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. It's really awe-inspiring how everybody has come together to get this vaccine. Just fingers crossed that it works, that one of them works. And this is another question that's really starting to hit home now. You've all got your winter coats out, you've got your central heating on. What happens when the flu season starts? This is a beautiful picture of influenza, one of our other enemies. And there's been a small study in the UK during the early pandemic that suggested that if you were infected with flu and COVID at the same time, you were more likely to die than if you were just infected with Sars Co2 by itself. This is kind of commonsensical. If you're being attacked by two things instead of one, it's going to be worse. But actually, there isn't a lot of evidence. What is more interesting and really fascinating, actually, is that influenza is at an all-time low. So it was low in the Northern Hemisphere at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was low in the Southern Hemisphere during their winter, which was our summer, likely because of social distancing, lockdowns, and other restrictions. So they were designed to prevent COVID, but they were actually preventing all respiratory viruses. And this is just a graph showing you that in gray are all the flu seasons, that in general that would end in May, but in the Northern Hemisphere, in orange here, it was cut abruptly short by lockdown in April. But I must stress, getting your flu jab this year is very important, if only to keep up herd immunity, reduce flu hospitalizations, and keep those hospital beds free for COVID and other people who need them. So get your flu jab if it's offered to you. The long winter, is Sars CoV-2 seasonal? Is it a seasonal virus? This is actually a really interesting and controversial question. So other coronaviruses have their season, the cold, right? November, December, January, that's when you tend to get colds. But people thought, oh, and let me just show you here, these are coronaviruses. These are the ones that cause the common cold. These three lines here, you can just see peaks and troughs, peaks and troughs. The peaks are the winter. Those are people positive for those viruses, and the troughs are the summers. And if you look at one complete year, you can see all the corona cold viruses wane between June and about now, and then they come into their own again. But people thought maybe Sars CoV-2 wasn't seasonal because it kept going during the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. So people thought, well, it's not seasonal, it's still going. But actually, that might just be a reflection of the fact that it has no immune resistance, and it was just finding lots of people to infect. So maybe it wasn't on turbo mode, but it was still spreading really nicely. It doesn't mean that it's not seasonal. It might just be coming into its own now. Winter is also a time when we move indoors. It increases the chance of transmission. So I think we must brace ourselves for a big surge of possible infections from now in the Northern Hemisphere, because it may be seasonal. And certainly we're going to be exposed to it more indoors. This talk is really depressing, and I'm sorry. I will end on a note of hope. This is my last slide. When will we get back to normal? Well, I mean, I think we will get back to normal one day. Some form of restrictions will probably be in place for some time to come. We are at risk of further waves until sufficient immunity builds up, and I think it's safe to say that we in the UK and in Europe are seeing our second wave now. Realistically, this means that until a vaccine is widely deployed, we will have to go into periodic lockdowns. And so we're looking at mid-late 2021. And it might be a permanent, like our new flu, but hopefully the vaccine will allow us to live with it. And then, but this is the bad news, inevitably there's probably going to be more pandemics. We live in an age when we're increasingly coming into contact with animals. We live in a global society, we travel a lot, and there will be future pandemics. We knew this one was coming, and there will be more. So my message of hope is, I think there's a lot of kids out there in school right now watching this thing, and I want to say to you, if you are considering wanting to help in this battle, this is the battle of a generation, I think you should consider going into science or healthcare, because we need you to become the next generation of scientists and healthcare professionals that fight these really terrible battles. And if you're interested, the Faculty of Medical Sciences here at UCL would love to help you on your journey. We've got amazing courses. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny, Dr. Rohn. It's been a really amazing presentation, and we have approximately 450 participants tonight, which is a really high number of very interested students and public in general. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. And we have a number of questions, quite a lot actually, and we're gonna try to go through all of them. We only have approximately 20 minutes, 25 minutes, but some of them are repetitive, so and some of them have already been answered in the presentation. So we'll try to just go through them, probably the most relevant. So number one, are there specific reasons as to why certain communities, like the BME community, are thought to be more at risk of COVID than others?
That's a really complicated question. It's an excellent question. There's no question that it's true that BAME individuals have borne the brunt of this infection. It could be that they tend to have more underlying comorbidities, but actually that doesn't tell the whole story. And at the moment, we're not sure why, but it's an area of ongoing research, and I think it's a really crucial area. We need to understand what's happening so we can help protect people better.
Yeah, that's very true. So next question, can enzymes not be used as a way to destroy the RNA gene base codes that could possibly prevent COVID?
Well, there's all sorts of strategies that one could use, and it's true that you could use enzymes. It's interesting to note that your own body uses enzymes. So in your eyes, if a virus lands in your eyes, there's a really cool enzyme that will break viruses down. And I think one clever strategy might be to hook up some sort of enzyme and put it into the cell and try to chop up things. It's a little bit of a tricky strategy because enzymes are made out of proteins, and those are really difficult because, you know, if you take a pill that's made out of protein, your stomach will digest it. So it's a really tricky delivery question, but I love hearing ideas like that, because when I'm in the teaching my course and I hear students come up with these crazy ideas, sometimes I hear things I've never heard before, and it's because younger people tend to be more creative and they haven't heard it all before and they're less inhibited. So I think if you've got a crazy idea, come to our faculty, take one of our courses, and become a Nobel Prize winning scientist. Really, I love all crazy ideas.
And really, I think the greatest discoveries in medicine just came out of a crazy idea. So I think that's very relevant. Next question, is it safe to create a vaccine without following all the steps in the clinical trials?
No, absolutely not. The thing about a vaccine is, unlike a drug, you're giving this to healthy people. So whenever you give something universally to healthy people, you got to be pretty sure that it's not dangerous, and you mustn't take any shortcuts. I know there's been some countries out there who have taken shortcuts, and I know that people are worried about shortcuts being taken in other countries. The bottom line is, nobody should approve any of these vaccines until they've been definitively shown to be safe, and that's what the phase 3 trial is for. So people are proceeding very carefully. This is the one shortcut, unfortunately, that we can't take.
Yeah, that's true. Is there any evidence that people who have had COVID can still be carriers afterwards?
So there's been a few reports of reinfection, which is people who tested positive for COVID and then a few months later test positive again, and they've shown it's a different strain, so it's not a reinfection. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, and I'd be really worried if I had long COVID and I had lots of symptoms, and even if I tested negative, I would wonder whether there are reservoirs in the body. It's known with other viruses. For example, herpes virus, the virus that causes a cold sore. You never get rid of herpes. It basically is in your lip for a while, and then it crawls back into down your nerves and is latent for months and years, and then it can come back. So there's no evidence that Sars Co2 does this, but I would never say never when it comes to viruses, especially new viruses. So yeah, I think it's probably unlikely, but we just don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's so many things we don't know yet, and only it's still gonna take a lot of research to find out the answer. So yeah. When do you think, in your personal educated opinion, that society, in terms of social distancing and wearing masks, will go back to normal?
I have faith that one of these 170 vaccines is going to work well enough that it will be deployed sometime next year. And it'll be a real military operation to get everybody jabbed. But I think by the end of next year, like say autumn next year, I'm hoping that things will be largely back to normal. I don't know if we'll ever go totally back to normal. I mean, handshakes, do you think they're dead? Every time I think about shaking someone's hand, I think, ooh. I mean, maybe we've learned a lot of things, and maybe society will change a bit because of this. Maybe we'll be more careful. But I think the end of next year, I've got everything crossed for going back to mostly normal.
Yeah, I hope so. This is a very provocative question, but I think this is the kind of things that especially students are concerned about, because they hear people like Donald Trump talk about it. So what was the science or logic, if any, towards the idea of bleach being a cure?
I think this was just, President Trump is my president. I didn't vote for him, but I am American. I think he just speaks without thinking, and I think he was having a crazy idea. And I feel a bit bad. I think he was just talking out loud and had a really stupid idea, and it came out of his mouth, which often happens with politicians all over the world. So yeah, there's no scientific evidence. Obviously, you don't want to put bleach inside you. I mean, you can bleach your surfaces, you can bleach your toilet, you can bleach your doorknobs, but no, you must not take bleach.
Definitely not inside the body, yeah, absolutely. So another question, why do the severity of symptoms differ from individual to individual?
We have no idea. So it's all to do with the immune system. And it's possible that older people have, there's been some studies suggesting that they tend to be missing one of their early warning systems, which is called interferon. It's one of these early responders to virus infections. It looks like people with severe COVID might not do very well at the early warning response of the immune system. It could have to do with their, I'm going to backtrack and say we have no idea. And it's really mysterious. We don't know why people get long COVID. We don't know why some people get nothing. it's a mystery, and I think a lot of further study is required.
Yeah, that's true. Another question here that was in the news constantly, hydroxychloroquine. So how effective is it to treat COVID?
It's been, I mean, hydroxychloroquine was an idea. This is an example of, we were trying everything at the beginning. We had dozens and hundreds of clinical trials of things that we already use for other things, just trying them out. And there was some early suggestions that maybe it might work, but further studies have shown that not only does it not work very well, but it causes some really serious side effects in the heart, which makes it dangerous to take. So definitely the science, it takes a while for scientists to do lots of trials, and sometimes something that looks promising early turns out not to be promising. That is science for you. It is a process. It's not a snapshot. So there was a snapshot in time when it looked like that drug was maybe somewhat useful, but science has not borne that out. And it's not being used now. It shouldn't be used now.
That's true. Interesting question here. Why do some viruses no longer cause epidemics, like the Spanish flu, for example?
Well, the Spanish flu is just not here. If the Spanish flu came back tomorrow, it could cause an epidemic. So the thing is that viruses cycle in and out. When you have a vaccine for flu, you can sort of suppress it and then something else comes along next year. But many viruses have learned to coexist with us perfectly happily, and they don't cause any disease at all. And that is actually the natural evolution of pathogen and host. It usually starts out very contentious and people are very sick and it goes horribly wrong, but eventually viruses and bacteria and their hosts evolve and come to some sort of arrangement, because really the viruses don't want to kill us, as I mentioned. They just want to get along with their life, or lack of life. So yeah, we don't know why, but it's usually to do with evolution.
Yeah. And another interesting question, if coronavirus was to ever go away, is there a chance that it could come back?
So Sars Co2, well, if it goes away completely, like SARS Classic did, it's very unlikely that it would pop up again unless it had found an animal reservoir. So this is very common. So bacteria and viruses can exist in animals as well as people, and sometimes the animals can be a reservoir. This happens with flu. So if there were enough bats around that still had Sars Co2 and they were flapping around out there, it's possible they could transmit it again. Yeah, it could come back.
Yeah. Evie is asking, do you think the efficient or quick rate that vaccines are being produced at the moment will affect the reliability or the effectiveness of the vaccine? Have scientists taken time to develop the trial and try the vaccines?
Maybe a little bit, because usually these trials are a bit longer. They might involve a few more people. I mean, we're doing the bare minimum. But I think, as I mentioned before to the other questioner, nothing is going to be released in reputable countries that is not safe. But it's really difficult to test vaccines. You need lots of sick people around. So we were testing all these vaccines in the summer, the Northern Hemisphere summer, when there were hardly any COVID infections. So it was really hard to find enough people to take part in these trials that were anywhere where there was a lot of infection going on. And now we don't have that problem. But yeah, I still think, despite all the shortcuts, we will have a safe product at the end.
Yeah, I really hope so. Very relevant question. Is it true that COVID-19 is a vascular disease in the sense that the virus affects blood vessels, explaining the fact that many people have strokes even after recovery?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer. Actually, Dr. Marina, you might know the answer to this. I do know that it can cause clotting issues. So not maybe a vascular disease per se, but it could definitely induce coagulation of blood, which can lead to things like deep vein thrombosis or thrombus or strokes. But I don't think it's, I think it's primarily a respiratory disease and a disease of the airways. But I don't know, Dr. Marina, you might have some of the...
Well, yeah, actually I can expand a little bit on that. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that it is a prothrombotic condition. So basically it can increase the generation of blood clots. in different parts of the body, and one of the main parts of the body is in the arteries that irrigate the lungs. So that's why the lungs get so ill. Not just the interface between the air and the blood gets severely affected, but also the vasculature gets affected, and then you have a lot of problems of microthrombi all over the place in the lungs and in the brain and in the heart as well. So yeah, unfortunately, this is one of the biggest complications and challenges with COVID. Yeah. Another question. Do you think schools should be closing down with the recent surge in COVID cases and deaths?
Well, I'm a mother, and I think the worst thing we could do would be to stifle the education of a generation. I mean, I think schools should stay open. I think they should be the last thing that stays open. And I mean, there was some talk of having a 2-week half-term circuit breaker where everything shut down for 2 weeks. I think that was actually a good idea, but the government decided not to go with it despite scientific advice toward that. So I think the schools should be open. I mean, kids are not super spreaders as they are with influenza, but they are contagious, but they're not super spreaders. And I think by and large, it's probably a good idea to keep the schools open because, you know, life has to go on. We have to educate our children.
Yeah, that's true. Really interesting question here. What's the difference between how the virus acts in asymptomatic and symptomatic people?
Well, I mean, the difference is it doesn't seem to be getting deep into the lungs and causing these severe infections. This could be because asymptomatic people have mounted an appropriate early warning immune response. They've shut the virus down before it can get deep into the lungs. And the people who haven't done that are the ones who end up being sick. These are more likely to be people who are older. But we don't really know. We don't know. It's like a lottery because some young people have been stricken down and killed by COVID. A few kids have died. We don't know why. It's a big mystery, and it's probably to do with differing immunity in different people because everybody's different. And there's a lot of genetics that goes on behind the immune system. Everyone's got a slightly different immune system. And of course, things like, you know, what you eat and whether you're healthy, whether you exercise, these can all impact on the severity and then on the effectiveness of your immune response. So that's a £2 million question.
Yeah. Next question. How can you gain work experience right now with COVID-19?
Well, this is a problem we're grappling with on our course. It's very difficult. And I think that a lot of people are trying to offer online experiences. You know, we have a lot of research students that come to our labs every year in our course, and they haven't been able to set foot in our lab, but we've given them really interesting, bioinformatics, which is the science of, you know, using a computer to understand health and disease. We've had a lot of projects like that. I think eventually, you know, we'll get this under control and we'll get people back in the labs, but at the moment it's difficult. But you don't have to be in a lab to do science. You can do all sorts of interesting things on a computer that are still pushing back the boundaries of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually one of the biggest fields in science at the moment is, for example, artificial intelligence and big data. It's one of the most popular fields in science. You only need a computer for that. There's a couple of questions that I think might be good to link them because they seem to be kind of correlated. One of them, do you believe areas that sell live animals should be closed down forever? And another one, so why did COVID-19 only come into existence now?
So the first question is, after SARS Classic, so this was the SARS coronavirus of 2003, people were strongly encouraged to shut down these exotic animal markets, and they didn't. And it came back again. So yes, I think they should be regulated out of existence, but it relies on the goodwill of the countries that really like these kind of markets to follow through, and they didn't. I think now maybe they might be paying a bit more attention, but people have very short memories. You know, we're doomed to repeat our mistakes over and over as human beings. It's kind of what we do best. The second question, what was the second question?
So why COVID basically up till just recently finally emerged? I mean, if these markets have been open for such a long time, why until now? It
isn't that, you know, it happened with SARS in 2003. It happened with MERS in 2015. It's happened now. So statistically, it's probably going to happen again. It's, you know, Sars Co2 is not the first time this has happened. SARS was very similar, SARS classic, and a very similar pattern. The only difference was it wasn't as contagious, and that's why we got it under control. And I think it's going to happen again if they don't shut these markets down.
Yeah, that's true. This is a really interesting question. You were talking about the flu vaccine, and so during winter, how are doctors planning to differentiate between the common flu and COVID when tests are taking so long in order to avoid potential transmission between patients?
Yeah, this is a tricky question. I mean, the symptoms are slightly different, and I understand that they're trying to develop some rapid diagnostic tests that will test for both viruses at the same time. That's really what we need. We need a good, solid test that can tell you pretty quickly what you've got. But I think basically what we're going to have to do is just, when you get symptoms like that, you're going to have to self-isolate and wait for your test. If you test negative for COVID, you probably got the flu. And that's the best we can do at the moment. Yes, tests are taking a long time. They're taking too long. We really need to get on top of that problem.
This very dramatic question, but I think given the circumstances, would it be possible for a virus to evolve so quickly that it kills out the entire human race?
Yes, I think yes. I think back in the old days, before we had international travel and airplanes and we were so connected, I think that kind of a virus would arise in a village and would burn out the whole village and would be dead. But now, in the age of sort of, you know, where we are now with globalization, all it would take was something that was as infectious as Sars Co2, maybe as infectious as measles, which is probably the most infectious thing we have, but maybe a bit deadlier, not too deadly. And I think, would we wipe out? Okay, would we wipe out the entire human race? Probably not. There will be people who could be resistant, but it could wipe out a lot of people. If you think of the bubonic plague in the medieval period, I think it killed 2/3 of Europe, were just slaughtered. So it can happen, but I like to believe that we humans, enough of us will survive to repopulate that post-apocalyptic landscape and carry on as humans. But yeah, you never know with viruses. They're very, very, very clever.
Yeah, that's true. Another question. I heard that a 25-year-old male in the US got reinfected with COVID for the second time. Does this potentially mean that we will not be able to achieve herd immunity naturally?
Yes, I was just looking at that report. I think I mentioned it in my talk as well. It has happened. It's very rare, but reinfection does happen. And apparently this man was more severely infected the second time, because we were thinking, well, reinfections happen, but maybe they'll be less severe because we've been exposed already. But this example was not very good because he got it even worse. So I think it's very rare, but it does sort of call into question, as you say, a very good question. How immunogenic, or how much immune response do these coronaviruses actually elicit? If the answer is not very much, and we're really going to need a vaccine. And I don't want to be political, but there are people out there calling for herd immunity. Just let everybody get sick. But I don't think herd immunity is going to happen without a vaccine. Not with coronavirus. They're just too wimpy. They don't give us a good immune response on their own. We need that artificial stimulation of a vaccine. That's what I think.
And then this question, so how are vaccines being made if the virus is mutating?
Well, fortunately, the virus is not really mutating. Viruses like influenza, or especially the AIDS virus, they are so they're always mutating, and this is why we don't have a vaccine against AIDS. But coronaviruses are reassuringly stable. There's hardly any drift, and there's not much drift in that spike protein, which is where you really want to be able to focus your vaccines and your strategies. So thank goodness Sars Co2 is relatively stable, and long may that continue.
Yeah, that's a really good thing. Do you think the virus could have been made man-made due to its unique properties? Is there a chance?
I don't think we know enough about viruses as humans to actually design something. You know, we can barely work out how it's working now. And the best scientific minds in the world are working on coronavirus, and we still haven't cracked it. So I don't think anybody has that level of knowledge about viruses to make this thing. And there's a very, very good explanation for how it arose. It all makes sense. The market where it was originally isolated was the epicenter. It really, no, that's a conspiracy theory, and I don't believe it.
Yeah. For those outside the UK, you probably don't know that we have an outbreak at the moment, mainly in northern parts of the UK. So this question is about that. Why do you think there's more of an outbreak in the northern parts rather than in the southern parts?
I have no idea. I don't know if it has to do with socioeconomic status, if people in the South tend to be a bit more affluent. I don't even know if that's true. I think it just depends on, these viruses, they get a foothold in a community and they start spreading, and it depends on our behaviors as much as the virus. So it could be that those are the epicenters now and it's spreading all over the place. It has to start somewhere. The second it had to start somewhere. And really it's spreading all over the country, although it's concentrated more in the north. It's going up everywhere, so we really can't be complacent.
Yeah, that's true. This one in particular, I really like this question. What is UCL doing or done in the fight against COVID-19?
Oh, UCL's done so much. I mean, first of all, there was this collaboration with Formula One where we got out. We were in the situation back in the spring when we didn't have enough ventilators, and we basically, do you know the story, Neff?
Yeah, with Marvin's finger. Yeah,
tell the story.
It's one Mercedes. Yeah. And they helped to make some really sophisticated ventilator, CPAP machine for the patients. That all of a sudden Mercedes came with all their infrastructure, and they helped to create all these ventilators, which helped a lot of patients. Yeah, that was so fantastic.
We've got a lot of scientists who work on Sars Co2. We've got world-leading doctors. So the London hospitals. And there's a lot of innovation going on in hospitals because we're learning how to treat the virus better. I'm not a doctor myself, but I know that they've been hard at work working out the best way to treat patients. And for example, the Royal Free Hospital where I work is a COVID referral center, and they've done amazing work working out the best way to take care of these people. So even if we get a second wave and we get as many people in hospital as we did in the spring, hopefully not, but if we do, we now know a lot more about how to treat it, thanks to the work of these amazing doctors.
Yeah, I think we're much better prepared than we were back in March. Yeah. How does the virus cause loss of taste and smell? Is this loss permanent?
Well, I don't know. Do you know, Dr. Marine? I don't. Do you have
Yeah, well, actually, there are very similar mechanisms. If you think about the nerve terminals, which receive the chemical cues, basically, that are received by the brain. So, for example, in the nose, you have the olfactory epithelium, which you have a lot of nerve terminals there. And there's all other types of cells which support these nerve filaments. And apparently, these cells have a lot of ACE2 receptors, which is the receptor where the virus actually penetrates the cell. And the same thing happens in the tongue as well, where you have all the taste receptors, and that basically creates inflammation and creates a lot of disruption in the kind of biological properties of the cell membrane, and that just causes a disruption in the cell firing rate. And definitely, it's not lost. It's not permanent. Yeah, I can tell you that because I had COVID, and yeah, I lost the sense, especially the sense of taste. That was really weird. I don't remember losing the sense of smell. Probably because I was so ill that I just couldn't really remember that. But it came back after a week. So
that's good.
Yeah. Okay, I think just two more questions, and then we'll probably stop there. Do you think a monoclonal antibody therapy could be the future for COVID-19 treatment?
So yeah, President Trump seems to think so. It's a good idea, right? That you give the body some artificial antibodies to boost their natural response. You can do it quicker, so it takes a while to mount an antibody response. The body takes a few days to get going, and if you could give them straight away a massive flood of antibodies, I can see how that would hurt. And it's a good idea. The problem with monoclonal antibodies is they're very expensive. Unlike a steroid like dexamethasone, which costs 10p, this would be, hundreds of thousands of pounds to sort of develop, and it'd be very expensive therapy and difficult to roll out at a large scale. So I think there's a lot of traction there, but like I said, scientists have not proven that it actually works. Hasn't gone through all the trials yet, but it's a good idea, definitely a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Last question, and probably with this one we can finish with something a little bit more inspiring. So how long does a coronavirus survive on surfaces, especially in the winter? And with that question, I would like you to finish with some kind of recommendation to all of our young audience out there, how to take care in such challenging times. What do you think is the best thing? So, but the main question, how long does it survive on the surface?
You know, we used to be pretty confident about that, and it was like, you know, a couple of hours on cardboard, and you know, you probably saw the table, metal, and it wasn't more than, you know, but now there's been a study suggesting 28 days. So I think the main take-home message is that this is primarily an airborne virus. Yes, you can pick it up on a doorknob and you can touch your nose and give yourself, but that's not the main way it spreads. So as long as you have good hand hygiene and don't touch your face, it doesn't actually matter. There could be virus everywhere. You need to just get into the habit of washing your hands a lot and not touching your face. And then we don't have to worry so much. I think 28 days is a bit ridiculous. And I think, but you know, if I pick up a parcel from the postman, you know, I put it down, I open it up, I wash my hands, you know, it's becoming almost like second nature. And I think this is what I was talking about, that a lot of this new normal stuff will probably stay with us. So yeah, we're not really sure, but it could be more than we think. And as far as a message of hope, I mean, I just want to reiterate, although it's been a really terrible time, that the positive thing that I've seen is this amazing global cooperation and mobilization of scientists and healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses. We're all been working together, you know, across borders on these vaccines and on these drug trials. It's just been the most amazing outpouring of productivity, which is really the best thing you can do in a disaster, is not to just lock down and be scared, but to, you know, try to do something positive. And there's so many great scientists and doctors out there doing really great work. And this is why I say again to you, we need help. We need all the help we can get. So do consider going into this field, and do consider either at UCL or wherever you fancy going into this field and making a difference.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only thing that's going to help us in this really challenging times. Well, Dr. Jennifer Rohn, thank you very much for this amazing presentation and for all the answers to the questions of the students. Thank you very much to everyone who participated tonight. This video will be made available on YouTube in the next few days. You will receive a link, so if you want to watch it again, and hopefully we will see you again soon in November. We're going to have the next lecture of the series. We will let you know in due time what the next lecture is going to be. And in the meantime, please take care of yourselves and others, and see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.